A commentator in some of my videos asked me, how could King David be considered a man after God's own heart if he was an adulterer and a murderer? Now, the story of King David and Bathsheba reveals to us many wonderful things, such as how God always accepts us back, no matter how distant we become from him. But I want to go down a different track this time. I want to show you how it's impossible to understand the Bible unless you understand Judaism, unless you understand the Jewish people, the Jewish religion, the Jewish life, unless you understand Jewish history. A plain reading of the Bible, if you're just taking a simple translation and you're reading through it, could lead you to the conclusion that King David was an adulterer and a murderer. And while the Bible is very clear that King David did something very, very wrong, it definitely was not what you think it is. Well, you're probably wondering, how? How could you possibly think that he wasn't an adulterer and a murderer? So let's examine the story. Let's examine it through the lens of Jewish history. There's a commandment inside of the Bible that a Jewish woman is only allowed to be married to one man at a time. And the Torah takes this very seriously. If she has relations with another man, she is considered an adulterous woman. Now, this is something that we never want to happen. But let's ask the question, what happens if a woman is married to a man and he just disappears and he's gone for years at a time and she doesn't know what happens to him? If she goes and she marries another man, she's considered to be in a state of adultery, and that's a serious issue. Unfortunately, the Jewish people many times had to fight wars for their own survival, for conquering the land as God commanded. Different reasons they were engaged in battle. Now, when a Jewish man went off to war, there was no guarantee that he was coming back. He could die in battle, and there could be witnesses to that. But what happens if he were to die and nobody were to see that he had died? Or what happens if he were to be taken hostage, God forbid? Then that woman would be left chained with no witnesses to free her from that marriage, and she would be considered a living widow for the rest of her life or until her husband remakes his appearance. In order to prevent that situation, the Jewish people had a custom of offering soldiers before they went off to war a conditional divorce. Now, what this meant is that during the time that the husband and wife lived together, they were married, but when he went off to war, when he separated, they were no longer considered married. However, when he came back, then their marriage would resume. Ever since the days of Moses, these conditional divorces have been available for soldiers to give their wives in order to prevent their wives from living as a living widow for the rest of their lives if they were to just disappear. You can actually see these conditional divorces alluded to in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 18, when King David goes to visit his brothers who are about to go into battle. He brings them cheeses, he requires of their welfare, and he takes something. He takes something that is commonly translated as a token or a pledge. But this is alluding to the conditional divorces. The men were sending back to their wives to allow their wives to remarry, in case they didn't come back. Now let's take this historical context that we have and apply it to the situation of King David and Bathsheba. When King David saw Bathsheba, he saw through prophecy that eventually the Messiah was going to come through her line, and he wanted to marry her in order to fulfill this prophecy. However, the time was not ripe, and he should have waited, and he kind of jumped the gun. Now, Uriah had gone off to battle, and they were technically divorced, but Uriah still considered Bathsheba his wife. He was still emotionally connected to her. It wasn't a divorce because of hatred. It was simply to save her, that she should not fall into the situation of being a chained widow. So when King David was intimate with Bathsheba, she was not married. She was not committing adultery, and neither was he. Neither of them were culpable according to the law. King David was intimate with her, she went back to her house, and then she informed him that she had conceived. King David was like, oh my gosh, this is a serious issue. Later, when Uriah returned from battle, King David tried sending him to his house. Go, 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 I want you to go be with your wife so people don't realize that something transpired. But Uriah refused. He didn't listen to the king's command. Anybody who doesn't listen to the command of a king is chayav misa. They're deserving of the death penalty. But King David didn't want to enforce this. He's like, okay, I'm not going to give him the death penalty. I'm going to leave it into God's hands. So he arranged a situation where soldiers went out to fight, and he had the soldiers drop back and leave Uriah exposed to the surrounding army. And he died. He fell in battle. And for a period of time, King David was able to live with himself over this without feeling too much guilt. But eventually Nathan came to him and he told him, he said, you made a big mistake, buddy. And King David immediately said, Chatasi Lashem, I have sinned to God. At the end of the day, King David was neither a murderer or an adulterer according to the letter of the law. He had operated according to loopholes. And he truly was a righteous person who simply fell in this matter. He should have held himself to a higher standard, but he gave in to this temptation. And the truth is, the higher we are, the lower we can fall. It can happen to anybody. Unfortunately, the side effect of this great person falling in the spirit of the law was that God's name was looked down upon. This was the sin that King David was officially guilty of. And King David said, I have sinned to you alone, God. And with a broken heart and a contrite spirit, King David fully repented and God forgave him. This story brings out so many wonderful points. It shows us how even great people can fall. And no matter how far we fall, God stands ready to take us back should our hearts move us to repent, should we truly come back to God. Moreover, it teaches you that you can't just read the Bible like a storybook because you're not going to get the details. You have to come back to the Jewish people. You have to learn it through a Jewish lens. And if you don't, you're not going to understand. That's why Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23 says that at the end of days, the non-Jewish nations of the world are going to grab hold of the Jewish people and they're going to say, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. You have information that we don't have. And yes, non-Jewish people have access to the Bible. But you can't understand the Bible unless you understand Judaism. And then at that point, if you have read the Bible, if you have learned the Bible through a Jewish lens, you can go back and you can look at the New Testament and you can say, this is not a Jewish book. This is not of God. It contradicts everything inside of the Torah. Unfortunately, Christianity has attached itself in a parasitic fashion to the Jewish Bible, has corrupted it, contorted it, mistranslated, abused it. And this is how you get Christianity. Christianity is a hybrid religion that takes from Judaism and takes from pagan religions. Because people heard about the Jewish God and they said, wow, this is a great God. This is a wonderful God. We want to serve this God. But, circumcision, ritual commandments, we don't want that. So Paul came along and he says, I can give it to you. You can have the Jewish God. You don't have to do any of the circumcision, the commandments kind of thing. So yeah, and he created this religion that was very attractive to the masses, and the masses began converting, and they brought with them their pagan customs, and they incorporated blood-drinking rituals, human sacrifice, vicarious atonement, so many different pagan concepts. It's not Judaism, and you will never understand the Bible unless you get back to the real God of Israel as taught by the Jewish people. If you would like to do that, you're more than welcome to come learn our Torah. We don't believe that the Jewish people are better than anybody else, and you don't have to be like us. You don't have to convert. You can be a righteous non-Jew. God expects you to live according to the moral code that he gave to the entire world and to serve him and only him with no intermediaries, no man gods. So it's time to get back to the real Bible. I hope to welcome you back.